All right. Well, thanks for coming out, everybody. Did you want to talk about our practices first?
Sure, go ahead.
So we actually don't practice together. I practice on Detroit Road in Westlake at Madison Eye Care, and we're a primary care facility that we do everybody from 6 months until 100 and whatever. And I'm kind of in charge of the vision therapy portion of the practice there. And in terms of vision therapy, Dr. Andrich is definitely a seasoned veteran compared to me. I've been doing vision therapy at Madison Eye Care for 2 years and had some really awesome success, but our clinic is rather small at this point, but we're growing. So that's kind of where I'm from.
And our practice is in North Royalton, and we have an east side location and hopefully soon a west side satellite office. Primarily vision therapy, but we also do brain injury, sports vision, same as Dr. Steele, all age groups, 6 months. We've even had 2 and 3 month olds in therapy, all the way up to elderly stroke type patients. So quite a wide variety, full spectrum vision therapy, vision rehab practice. We have another optometrist in the practice, my sister, Dr. Cerny, Angelina Cerny, and my wife, Patty Andrich, is an occupational therapist, and she's the director for our therapy center. So we have a lot of fun, and glad to be here tonight, share our knowledge with you folks, and want to thank Sarah and Connecting for Kids for having us out here. So we'll talk about vision skills in the classroom. Dr. Steele is going to start by going over what are some of the skills that kids should have in the classroom setting that will help make academics more proficient for them. And then we'll talk a little bit at the end, or second half will be, I'll present on vision development and how vision actually develops. And then I'll talk a little bit about ADHD, dyslexia, and we'll have some fun, and then we'll answer questions. But it's a nice small group, so let's make it interactive. Feel free to chime in anytime and ask any questions that you like. So.
All right. Well, I'm going to start with visual skills in the classroom. So first off, this concept of a visual skill. We think that we're born with everything and we just naturally know how to do things, and that's not necessarily true. Dr. Andrich is going to talk about all the things that go into the visual development, but there are certain actual skills that if children don't have in the classroom, you're going to notice some problems. So we're going to break it down in kind of 3 different parts. There's the visual input, the visual processing, and then also we'll go over some symptoms that you might notice with your child if there are some problems with visual skills. Before we get to that, I did want to make note that vision is much, much more than 20/20 eyesight. So a lot of times, you know, kids will have their kindergarten screenings at the school, just with the school nurse, or at the pediatrician where you get your eyes examined. But really all they're doing is covering an eye and saying, can you see it? Can you see with the other one? Can you see it with both? Good, you're 20/20, everything's great. That is not necessarily true. So as a little demo.
So we're going to have everybody stand up. So we're going to make you guys work a little bit. So go ahead and stand up, eyes open, and then I'd like you to keep your hands at your sides. And then go ahead and just stand on 1 foot. Okay.
Good. Everybody's, except for Sarah. No.
Well, if you have high heels, it makes it tough. Okay, back to 2 feet. Okay, now close your eyes. Okay, now stand on 1 foot again. Eyes closed. Okay, now back to 2 feet. You can sit down. So do you guys want to share with us, what did you notice? What did you feel? I can tell you what I saw.
Yeah, lots of wobbles.
Swaying. So what was different each time? Equilibrium was off. Right. The first time you had the use of your visual system. The second time you're just relying on the fluid in your ears, your vestibular system. We took vision out of the equation. So you see how vision is more than just being able to see an eye chart. You use vision actually for balance quite a bit. So, so it's definitely, as Dr. Steele said, there's a lot more to vision than just being able to see a small letter 20 feet away on an eye chart.
Yeah. And so here on this slide, there's just some nice clear text up there for you, which is hopefully how everyone sees. But could you imagine if this is what it looked like? So if everything's just slightly double there, and you probably could get through it and muscle through and figure out what it says, but it's definitely not easy. Dr. Andrich has a little demo here that these glasses kind of make you see double up and down here. And
you can look at the back of the brochure and take a look and see what the print looks like. See how long you think you'd be willing to read. Think about what you'd retain if the print looked like this. A lot of the kids we see, this is how they see when they read.
And they can see it, and you have 20/20 vision, don't you? We didn't change that. All we did was make it double. So could you imagine if that was your kid just fighting to kind of get through all of that? So all sorts of things other than 20/20 vision. So that's really important that everybody realizes that for sure. So kind of more on the details of the visual input portion of this. So we're going to touch on 3 parts here: focusing, converging and diverging, and then saccades. So this first one here, that focusing, which is also known as accommodation. If you kind of look at my little picture there, that shows that kind of an eyeball looking this way. And you can tell that right behind the colored part of the eye there's that really nice clear lens, looks like a big oval, and it's held on the top and bottom. It's actually held all the way around, but that's a cross section, so you can see a top and the bottom by some muscles there. So kind of what needs to happen in order for the eye to focus is when we look far away, those muscles need to be totally relaxed, make that lens nice and skinny and flat, and everything's nice and clear for distance. When you look at anything close, and really it's about 6 feet, but I think in the classroom I like to think like arm's length and closer, those muscles need to flex, and that makes that lens get actually shorter and fatter, and then that'll make that distance clear. So you can figure, when a student is in class and they're watching the teacher and they're taking notes or they're reading from the book or copying from the board, this needs to be changing constantly. So we've got to relax muscles, see clear at distance, and then flex to look at our paper and make sure that's all clear, and go back and forth. So you can imagine even a student with perfect 20/20 vision, if they have any irregularity in the ability to do this with the right amount of magnitude or the right amount of accuracy, that of course there's going to be problems there. So one of the things that Dr. Andrich and I deal with a lot is like an accommodative insufficiency, where they can't quite control that, or an accommodative infacility, where they can do it but they can't really go back and forth. That, yeah, I can make this clear and I can make that clear, but there's a lag in the two of those things. So both of those things can make classroom learning very difficult.
A lot of times kids have trouble with that focusing mechanism. They can do it for a short amount of time, but it's kind of like a chin-up. You can do 1, you can do 2, but after a while it's like, ugh, he can't do it. So it's not necessarily that they can't focus their eyes at all, it's just they can't do it for long or very efficiently, as Dr. Steele said.
Yeah. So moving on from that, converging and diverging is a really important thing too. So what these 2 pictures show is that first one shows eyes diverging, so both pointing straight ahead to look at something in the distance, so like looking clear across the room to read off the board. As you look closer and closer, your eyes actually do need to turn farther and farther inward. If your eyes don't point at the same exact thing, you're going to see 2 of it. So you can imagine that's kind of our little demo with those goggles, that things can be awfully distracting that way. One of the really most common problems that I know I see, and I know you probably do too, is convergence insufficiency. The kids have a very hard time turning their eyes inwards. And so they're seeing double. I know I don't know how many kids I've seen who, here at arm's length, they're double anywhere closer than this. So here, why don't you go do your homework? Why don't you sit here and read this book? And if everything's double, and it may not be double all the time, if it's going in and out, single versus double, it is super hard to pay attention to. So these kids, just seem like they're poor students when really their eyes just aren't working together.
Or they'll do this when they're reading.
And cover one eye like that.
They're covering one eye, so now they're not having trouble converging because one eye is taken out of the fight.
Yeah, because you only see one image anyway. There's no way you can make it double. Yeah, so that's a really very common problem with a whole lot of symptoms. Actually, Dr. Andrich is going to talk a little bit about ADHD later on in the presentation, but a lot of kids who actually have convergence insufficiency are sometimes misdiagnosed with that ADHD because they just don't want to do it. And well, why don't you want to do it? They can't articulate then what they're seeing is double, or that their eyes are tired from doing all of that. So let me see, moving forward. Saccades, this is another skill. So a saccade is the eye being able to jump from one point to another accurately. So whether you're copying off the board and looking at your own paper and your own handwriting to what you're looking at on the board versus your teacher's face to the board versus just reading. So we kind of have a fun little demo about saccades and eye movements. I guess the eye tracking is next here. I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself a little bit. But you can kind of see I have my little, is this from Madeline? Yeah. In an old house in Paris that's covered with vines, you have to make a complete eye movement to the next line. Live 12 little girls in 2 straight lines, so you have to make sure you make a nice, accurate movement there.
So I'll prevent her from having
Thank you.
So the eyes hop from word to word. Your eye makes a little, what's called a saccadic jump, and you go from word to word. So when you get to this word, vines, your eye has to make a jump over to this word exactly at that spot and accurately. And if it doesn't, you might skip to the line above, you might reread the same line, or you might drop a line. So saccades, as Dr. Steele mentioned, are a really important eye movement skill to help read efficiently. So,
yeah.
Do the demo.
So
here's a little demo.
So if we have a volunteer to read.
So go ahead and start with the arrow here and read out loud and follow the direction of the arrows.
This exercise was designed to force you to move your eyes in a different way while reading. As you read this, think of the children with poor eye movement.
Thank you.
So that's what she's reading up there. But if you can imagine, we are all, with normal visual skills, you're able to kind of track left to right like that smoothly and make these accurate jumps, but that's kind of a simulation that was reading up and then down. But that's not a natural eye movement, and that's a lot of work to do. And if you can imagine if your child sounds like that reading, that this is so much, why is it so hard for you to get these words out here? And would you remember anything you read there if that's how everything was? There's no way. There'd be no way. So it's just kind of crazy when you think all that goes into things, because if you were, somebody who acquired these skills just naturally, you just would never even imagine what these children are going through. Anything else on that?
No, it's a good example to show, like Dr. Steele said, that it's a skill to move your eyes left to right, top to bottom. It's just not something you're born with. You develop that skill, and when I get into the development portion of the presentation, you'll see how that develops. But you can clearly see now, if you were to practice, obviously you're a proficient reader, and if you were to practice, you'd eventually learn. But think about the different languages. In Arabic, they read right to left. Hebrews right to left. In Asian countries, they read vertically. So eye movements are different. We have a little boy that's in therapy now, and he spends half the day in English, half the day in Hebrew. And he's got really poor eye movements, and you can only imagine how tough it is for him to learn to read this way, and then the second half of the day he's got to read this way. He can't go one way, let alone the other way. So, working with him on eye movements is really going to be very important to help him succeed academically.
So all of those are kind of going into the visual input there. So that was the, focusing, the converging and diverging, the saccades, and the eye tracking. So that's assuming that you have all this perfect input and you're getting this signal into your brain. What do you do with it? So that's where we come to visual processing. And this is kind of tip of the iceberg because some of this gets a little bit abstract, but the concept of like right-left reversals, kids who often confuse their right and left, and it just seems that they should understand. Confusion between some of these letters. I know the B, D, P, and Q, all those lowercase. Which side of the stick is that ball on there? That kids are sounding them out wrong because they're looking at it wrong. And then also visual memory, too. You can imagine, we talked about note-taking little, that if you could remember one word at a time, how much longer it would take you to copy what's on the board versus if you could remember a full sentence or a full row that's on the board there. So there's just so many things that go into having normal visual skills, that you need that perfect input, but then you also need that processing skills, too, in order to, perform like you're expected to as a student. So some of the symptoms that can happen when children don't have these visual skills are kind of listed here. So headaches, Dr. Andrich was talking about with that focusing ability, that you can do it once, you can do it twice, but you keep on going and it just feels like so much work. So you'll get a lot of kids. I have tons of kids that come get their eyes checked because, she's getting headaches, always at the end of the day. And it's like, well, is it on the weekends? No, not really. It's like, well, that's kind of one of those that we see a lot, where it's, on school days towards the end of the day that they're completely achy from working so hard. The double vision, which we demonstrated, that if there's that problem with the convergence system especially, that you will see double. And this is one of those that's kind of tricky, because it's not like, well, are you seeing two of me right now? No, okay, well, that's not a problem. This is something that can come and go and be different with extended work, that at the beginning they've got it and it just kind of falls off as they go.
One of the things I recommend for double vision is ask your child, if you say, hey, do you see double? They'll say, no. Do the words ever move on the page like this? I'll say, oh yeah, they do that all the time. So you want to do the sliding hand demonstration to the child, and you'd be surprised how many times they'll say, no, they don't see double, but yeah, the words sometimes dance or move on the page. So this is actually double vision. It's not this, but it is considered double. So you kind of have to slide your hands and show them, and then they would say, oh yeah, that's what happens all the time. And I'm sure Dr. Steele can attest to this. It's just shocking when the kid says, yeah, the words dance on the page all the time, and mom's like, you never told me?
What? They
and
feel
the child's
horrible.
like, well, I didn't know any different.
Yeah,
I didn't know it was
that's what they
supposed to
see.
be any different,
Yeah, so how would they know if that's how they've always seen?
Right.
The blurry vision, of course, like if that accommodative system is off, that, sometimes it's clear, sometimes it's blurry. But it's tough because even that blur can look like kind of a wiggle on the page, or it's just fuzzy, and then since they're able to clear it, they don't necessarily be like, hey mom, this is blurry, I can't read it. It's not like this super clear-cut complaint, which would make it all so easy, but it's unfortunately not that way. Fatigue is a big one. If you're doing any of these things that we demonstrated, if you were trying to read with those double glasses on or anything like that, you can imagine how quickly you'd get tired. I'll have kids they'll fall asleep doing their homework, and it's like, well, we got to check a few things out here if that's what's going on there. Avoidance of schoolwork is a big one, and that's a tough one, because a lot of times it's like, is this a behavioral thing? Are they just not listening? They just don't like school? They don't like this subject? But really it's just like, no, this hurts my head and I'm tired and I can't read this, and so they just avoid doing it, and then it turns into this whole other issue here. The skipping lines we talked about, with those kind of inaccurate saccades, that you're jumping to the wrong line when you're trying to find the beginning of that next line. The words moving or jumping on the page, kind of how Dr. Andrich just explained. This is a big one, is taking longer to complete assignments than expected. You can imagine if you were reading with one of these differences, that you can do it, it's just going to take you twice as long a lot of the time, and that's something that can be a big frustration at home, because you see if you have multiple children and one of them's just flying through everything, and it's like, what are you doing? Are you watching the TV, or what is going on here? But really a lot of times it's just that they're fighting so hard that it's just taking longer. And then this is a huge one, the knowledge not being the same as the school performance. Because let's face it, you guys know your kids, and you'll study with them, and you'll ask them questions all day long, and it seems like they've got that history book just ingrained in their head. And then you go and take a test, and guess what? We're reading, and we're filling in bubbles, or we're writing things out here. And all of a sudden it's like, you knew every single one of these answers, or you can take their test that they failed and just ask them the questions and they'll get them right all of a sudden. So that's a huge one. Yeah, so the question is that we're wondering if you're actually using so much bodily energy focusing and unfocusing the eyes that it'll actually put you in a state of exhaustion by the end of the day. Absolutely 100% yes. It's not necessarily like I can see how you'd say that, because it's not like you're running a marathon and it's burning all these calories or anything like that. It's just so much effort, that it'll just make you super tired and get headaches and things like that. And that's such a great observation, a great comment on your part, because you would never think that it's like, oh, it's just your eyes, because they're just so beat. Like, really, this is your eyes, that's it? Like, oh my gosh, what an easy problem to fix. Any other comments on that? No, that's okay. That's a great comment, though. That's perfect, because you would never know unless you kind of listen to this anyway. But good segue, though, too, that this is fixable, thankfully. So that kind of brings us to us, that treatment for a lot of these problems is optometric vision therapy, which is what Dr. Andrich and I do. So that's something that is doctor supervised. I know Dr. Andrich has a lot of therapists in his practice. Some are OTs, or some not OTs also.
Yeah.
OTs and non-OTs. Our practice is still small, so it's just me doing my own therapy, so I'm supervising my own people in the room with them, but very, very similar type things. And we both do both in-office and home therapy. Like for how my practice works, for example, I'll meet with kids for 45 minutes once a week, and then I'll send homework to do 4 more times. Homework's usually 20 minutes max. But it's amazing that both are so important, that if it was just in office, yes, we could get there, but it would take much longer. I'm amazed sometimes I'll send something home and the kids will come back and I'll be like, what just clicked this week? That was awesome. They're just rocking it out when they come back the next week. So it's really just really great. But the important note on this, and this is something that I think a lot of people have a misconception about, is that what vision therapy does is it develops your visual skills and not necessarily muscle strength. So it kind of makes me think of your question too. A lot of people think, so like convergence insufficiency, for example, that inability to turn those eyes inwards, that, oh, your muscles just aren't strong enough. You can't get your eyes to both go inward. I always love to kind of look at this. So if I cover this eye, let's say I had convergence insufficiency, and I do this with every single one of my patients. They're always so good at it. I've had no one fail this yet. But if I cover an eye and I say, okay, follow here, and look, oh, that eye can look way across their nose until it's behind my hand and I can't see it anymore. And then this eye, oh, can look way across my nose until it's not behind my hand there. But then if you go like this, why can't they both do it at the same time? So it's not a muscle thing, it's a brain thing. It's kind of how your brain has learned to use your eyes together. So that's kind of a cool thing. If it was a muscle thing, it would be like going through your P90X workout and doing so good and then doing nothing for 6 months and you lose all of it. Since it's not muscle strength, it's more of we're rewiring your brain. We're teaching your brain how to use your eyes. So once you know how to do it, you don't forget it. I love Dr. Andrich's example that he told me once, and I love this. I use it all the time. I don't know if you know that. It's like learning to tie your shoe. Once I teach you how to do it, and it might take some time, whatever, but you figure it out. If you switch to Velcro for a couple years and then I give you regular Nikes with some laces on there, you're going to have no problem getting back to it. And that's what's so cool about the vision therapies. I always say it sticks. We work on that convergence insufficiency. You've got it figured out. I've had no one slip yet.
Except now they have Nike shoes that lace themselves.
Yes.
Kind of ruins my example now.
Yeah, it totally does.
But our office is similar to Dr. Steele's in terms of therapy. Child comes to us, we determine what skills do they have, what skills don't they have, and therapy is prescribed, just like in Dr. Steele's office, based on skill deficits. And so we determine what skills we want to work on and improve. They go home, so in our office, like her office, it's once a week therapy in office, and then it's 5 days a week at home. It's similar to if you go to a golf pro and they teach you how to swing a golf club once a week. They're going to say, hey, here's how you hold the golf club, here's how you swing it. See me next week for another lesson, but before you see me, go to the driving range and hit a bucket of balls every day to practice what we've learned. Mm-hmm. So the home therapy is critical. I know we're overscheduled and there's soccer practice and piano lessons and swimming, but the most successful cases we have are the ones that are very regimented. Absolutely. And do very, very good with the home therapy because you're practicing a skill, and neurologically that's being embedded and it becomes automatic. And it's less likely to decompensate over time the more automatic it is for you. So the home therapy is really important. And we've actually had cases where we'll stop therapy if they're not compliant with home therapy because the child's not going to be able to gain the skills with just office-based therapy. There are some computer programs, and like anything else on the internet, there's a million things that claim they do a million things. Computer programs have been shown just as a standalone to not be effective for treatment, like say of convergence insufficiency. So they're nice programs out there, but they're more of an adjunct to a comprehensive program that's been prescribed. So there's a lot of claims out there on the internet with things that can help your child. So you kind of got to be careful, what you see and what's out there.
Yeah, and with the home therapy too, I know it's like, oh my gosh, one more thing here that you have to fit into your schedule. I don't know, do you have a max time? I always tell people 20 minutes and then you're done.
That's it.
But we change it up every week. It's always something different. Usually the kids like it, and if there's one that's no fun, I just joke with them and say, hey, this is the one you're going to hate. You want to do it first every day? It's going to take you 2 minutes. Set a timer and do it for 2 minutes. It's not that you're doing the same exact thing every single time you go home, because that's, we understand, we're both parents, the struggles of being the parent, that we try to change it up and make it easier for everybody.
And we tell them to break it up, so you don't have to do 20 minutes in a row. Do 5 to 10 minutes, take a break, go do another 5 to 10 minutes later. Similar to kids that have deficits that we've talked about, we don't expect you to, and you shouldn't do homework for an hour straight because it'll take you 3 hours. So do homework, break it up into chunks. It's more difficult time-wise, but do 20, 30 minutes of homework, take a break, go do some chores, run outside, shoot a basketball hoop, come back, do another 20 minutes of homework, take a break. So that sometimes helps a lot, breaking it up into chunks. All right.
Yeah, I think we can cruise ahead to your
Yep.
part here, so pass it off.
So we're going to talk a little bit about development of vision skills. How, Dr. Steele mentioned it is a skill. Well, okay, so if it's a skill, you develop a skill. You're not given a skill. You have to develop it over time. So we'll talk about that, and then at the end we'll talk a little bit about ADHD and dyslexia and autism. Dr. Gassell is a famous pediatrician. He said, quote, "To understand the child, one must understand the child's vision. To understand the child's vision, one must understand the child." So they knew way back when, I mean, you can tell it's a black and white picture, so it's old school, but they knew way back when that, hey, there were things that were really important for development in terms of learning in the classroom setting. When you think about it, classrooms were filled with desks that were slanted. You guys have seen pictures of it. Well, do you ever see slanted desks anymore? Why? Because the pencils kept rolling off and they're harder to stack. But why were does anyone know why the desks were slanted? Yeah, if you think about it, if I handed you this sheet of paper and said, "Here, read this for me," are you going to read it like this, or are you going to read it like this, right? So they knew back then that there were a lot of factors in terms of posture, vision that were important, and I think we've kind of gone away from that. So I'll be on my soapbox a little bit tonight about development and how kids need to move and those sorts of things to develop properly. So 20/20 vision, as we've talked about, is more than just seeing clearly on an eye chart. You have to take in the information, you have to process the information, and then you have to derive meaning from that information. One of the key things that's really tough for Dr. Steele and I is that vision deficits are pretty easily missed, and it's because physical deficits are pretty noticeable. They're pretty overt. If you've got a limp, it's pretty obvious. Speech deficits are really obvious, or can be generally. Vision deficits, on the other hand, can be overt or covert, and a lot of the cases that we see, they're not. You can't look at a child that's having trouble focusing their eyes and look at them and say, "Oh, they must have trouble zooming in and zooming out with their accommodative system." It's just not something that's very visible, and even the child can't really tell you. So the development of vision skills, you have to have the proper experiences at the right time. Vision will develop its role of guiding behavior. It's a pretty simple principle. Your eyes tell your hands and feet what to do. So if you're a football player and you're running with the ball, your eyes are telling your feet where to go. So this is something that develops early on. If you're a kid that's out climbing, running around, jumping, climbing trees, jumping around on playground sets, you're going to have appropriate experiences at the appropriate time. I like to say that development is like a train that keeps moving. And if you're ready to receive the right experience at the right time, you'll develop that skill at that time. We see a lot of kids in our office that are from third world countries that have been adopted, and they've been in orphanages for the first 12 months, some even 24 months, and they have very, very little sensory input. They're in their crib basically 22, 23 hours a day. And so you see a complete lack of development of eye movement and motor skills. So when you think about it, when is vision passive and when is vision directing movement? If a toddler is walking on a flat surface versus a toddler walking in the field. So if your child spends their entire day walking in your house and you've got nice ceramic floors or hardwood floors versus that child spends 2 hours outside in the field where the grass is uneven, they're going to develop differently with that type of experience. So that's the whole soapbox. They got to get outside, they got to play, they got to run around and jump. Otherwise, they'll be on their phones doing this like my kids want to do all the time. So vision development begins at birth, actually even before birth, but that's too long of a lecture to include everything. Visual skills are learned, so newborns have the structures to see, but then they don't have the ability to use those structures properly until the skills develop over time. So they really haven't learned how to use their eyes yet. Babies spend a lot of their early time just developing the focusing, eye teaming, eye-hand coordination. All of those things are starting to form immediately after birth. More complex skills happen over time so they can interpret their world. So at birth to 4 months, basically they see patterns of light and gray, kind of shades of gray. They can focus 8 to 12 inches, but much of their vision is blurred. So not to burst the bubble of first-time moms. When you walk into the room 8 feet away and the baby smiles, it's because the baby can hear you and sense you're there, but not because they can see you clearly. Focusing develops. They look at faces, they look close, they look far. They start to develop those types of skills. Once they start following objects, so you have the little rattle, the little toy, so they're following objects, you're now starting to develop and coordinate eye movements. This is the age also, I think some of the most current up-to-date research on autism shows that they're finding lack of eye movement and eye contact as young as kids 4 to 6 months old as an indicator or marker of autism potentially. So these eye movements are something that start to develop at this age. Eye-hand coordination begins, and now babies can see in full color. 4 to 6 months, there's a big leap here in terms of skills. Now they're reaching, grasping at objects freely. Their brains have finished learning how to fuse images together, so now they're actually starting the first stages of seeing in 3D. So they're using what we call two-eyed vision with stronger depth perception. And then eye-body coordination is starting to develop even more now, because now they're learning this rollover, sit, scoot. Spatial and dimensional awareness continues to improve. So now they're starting to figure out space. They start crawling and they start looking and they start setting goals and start looking at, oh, there's a big room, I can start moving in this room. Eye teaming and focusing start to develop even more refined on a refined basis, 6 to 8 months. And now they're starting to accurately go from near to far much quicker. So that's that accommodation or focusing mechanism that Dr. Steele was talking about. Visual acuities, usually at 6 to 8 months we start to see that they're pretty close to 20/20. Big question I get is, well, how do you tell? They can't read the eye chart. So we have special paddles that we use with stripes on them, and the stripes get narrower and narrower, and we flash the two paddles. One paddle will have stripes and one won't, and we look to see which one the baby looks at, and they generally will look towards the stripes. And the smaller the stripes, the better the visual acuity. So we call that preferential looking. So we have ways of checking visual acuity in this age group. Babies start to crawl, and now they're starting to figure out they see something and they want to go get it. So they're setting visual goals for themselves. A lot of new experiences now that they've got this ability to move and not just kind of squirm in one spot. They start to figure out, where's my body versus in relation to other things. So they start to figure out size, shape, position. So some of these visual perceptual skills that they'll need later to recognize shapes and sizes of things. 8 to 12 months, they're starting to judge distances pretty well. They can grasp and throw objects fairly accurately now. And then they have perception skills such as visual memory, visual discrimination, makes more sense of their world. They also start to develop what's called object permanency. So if I have a Cheerio and I go to the baby, here's your little Cheerio, and then like, it's gone, they'll start looking behind my back because they'll know that it's back there. Younger than this, they don't really have that concept down. So those are the types of visual imagery, visual perceptual skills that are developing. Fine motor skills now start to become a factor. They're going to start manipulating things. They'll, on their tray, they'll have Cheerios. They'll start picking them up, grasping them. They're using their eyes to direct and coordinate their body's large muscle groups to guide whole body movements. So you're starting to see fine motor and gross motor really coming into play at 8 to 12 months of age. And toddlers to preschoolers, a lot of times you think, well, they made it to age 2, they're done crying, and now they're just getting ready for kindergarten. A lot actually happens between age 2 to 5. So when you show up to kindergarten at age 5, your tool belt should be full of tools to be able to handle the demands that are going to be placed on you. These preschool years, they're still developing eye-hand body coordination. These are all skills that are going to be necessary to learn how to read. Before the age of 2, they learn how to walk and coordinate physical movements, large muscle groups. Fine motor skills are starting to be developed, and these are all needed. What happens when you get to kindergarten? They give you a pencil, and now you have to write your name. Well, if you don't have fine motor skills developed properly, it's going to be hard to do that. Some more things at age 2 to 5. Eye-hand body coordination, eye teaming, these are all continuing to develop. So it's not like, oh, age 12 months, it's developed, it's good to go, I'm ready for kindergarten. It still continues to get refined and further developed up until age 5. So this is the age where you want to encourage building, stacking some building blocks, rolling a ball back and forth, cutting, drawing, assembling locked together toys. All of those things are really important at this age. The other one is reading to your young child. I can't stress enough how important this is. A child, when they're being read to, is going to develop a picture in their mind of the story that's going on, so that when they go and learn how to read, they're mechanically moving their eyes and they're deriving meaning from what they're reading, but they're also picturing the story. Some kids, when they read, they struggle so hard with letter recognition or eye movements or tracking or focusing. There's no visual image of what's going on in the story because all their effort is to try and sound these letters and words out. So being able to read to your child at a young age will help develop that skill of visual imagery, and we use that imagery for comprehension and recall of information later on. So 5 years and up. We'll talk a little bit about an eye exam coming up here in a couple slides, but it's important that they have a complete eye exam. So I'll need your guys' help because Dr. Steele and I encounter this all the time. When a child comes in, we'll say, okay, have you had an eye exam? Oh yeah, we just had an exam with the pediatrician. And I'll say, oh great, you had a screening. So we have to stop calling those exams and we have to call those screenings because really, if they're just checking how well you see on an eye chart, that's really just a screening. So pediatrician, school, license bureau, those aren't eye exams. The optometrist needs to determine if the child's system, is it ready, is it prepared? Do you have the tools on your tool belt to perform in school properly and efficiently? The demands of schoolwork can and will put stress on a child that they've never had to experience before. Because if you think, what does a 3- and 4-year-old do? They're running around, they're playing. They're not sitting at a table doing near-centered work for long periods of time. So you'll see kids that have seemed to do pretty well age 3, 4, 5, not really any suspicion that school would be a problem. They get to kindergarten and whoa, all of a sudden alarm bells are going off like crazy, things aren't working well. Well, they've never had to use their eyes in a way that now they're being asked to use in kindergarten. So that's an important thing to kind of watch out for. So the symptoms that Dr. Steele mentioned are definitely important to look for. There's a couple of brochures that have nice symptom checklists. So as a parent, you can look through and see what are some of these symptoms and do they maybe correlate to a possible vision deficit. So kids now, they're using their eyes mainly for near work. Obviously in school you got to go near to far a lot, copying notes, looking at the teacher. So that's that focusing mechanism that we talked about. Kids don't often realize that they're using their eyes inefficiently, so they don't know they have a vision problem. They can't report it. It's not like a toothache where they can go, hey mom, my tooth hurts, fix it. This is something that they're just not going to be able to tell you that it's a problem for them. And to them, their vision is normal. They think everyone sees the way they do. And that's really similar to like a kid that gets glasses for the first time. We see this a lot. They put glasses on, it's like, oh wow, the tree actually has leaves. It's not just a green blob. They didn't know any differently. So, eye exam schedule. The first eye exam is recommended at 6 months. We can see them younger than 6 months. We've seen them as young as a month or two old. But 6 months is a good age to come in for a first eye exam. We can see, are the eyes healthy? Are they lined up straight? And we can shine a light in the eye with one of our instruments to tell, are they nearsighted, farsighted? There's a condition called amblyopia where you have a poor vision in one eye. That's because maybe they're born and one eye has no prescription and the other eye has a huge prescription. Well, that child's going to develop and act totally normal until they get to kindergarten. They do the vision screening. Oh, can't see out of one eye because the other eye was doing all the work for the first 5 years. So that's something we can detect early on at an infant eye exam.
And the earlier detected, it's so much easier to fix. Oh gosh.
Totally.
I'd take a 6-month-old over a 10-year-old any day.
A lot easier. They then recommend an exam at age 3. Exam at age 5, so there should be at least 3 eye exams with an eye doctor before starting kindergarten, and then they recommend annually thereafter. As a side note, if you go to your pediatrician, I forgot what the exact protocol is, but I believe the current protocol for the American Academy of Pediatrics is screenings until there's a problem or detected or until like age 7 or 8. So it's tough because if you go to the pediatrician, you may get a false sense of belief that everything's okay with the visual system.
Because they're just checking that 20/20 in
Right.
each eye.
Infancy is a program through the American Optometric Association. Dr. Steele and I are providers, and there are other doctors throughout Northeast Ohio that are providers for this. It's a national program. It's a no-cost eye examination for kids birth to 12 months old, and it is a comprehensive eye exam that should be completed before the first birthday. And again, it goes through all the elements that we talked about: the eye health assessment, the eye alignment, and checking to see if they're nearsighted or farsighted. So it's a great program. There's been a lot of great cases. I've seen a lot of kids that have benefited tremendously from having this exam early on, where we've picked up on some things. So it's a great program. As we've mentioned, screenings are a valuable service. I've provided some input to the Ohio Department of Education, Department of Health as far as guidelines and helping them structure proper screening protocols, but it's hard in the setting with schools. There's a lot to do. Screenings can be time-consuming, but they can also be comprehensive. So I've worked with several school districts in Northeast Ohio where they've had me come in and help them design and put together a screening program that looks at more than just 20/20. We look at their ability to track their eyes. We look at how well they can look far and near. So screenings can be very helpful, but definitely not a substitute for a comprehensive exam. Just a couple quick stats. Learning-related vision problems are actually pretty common. American Optometric Association did a study a while back, and they said that among school-age kids, vision disorders affect about 1 out of every 4 kids. So this is the whole spectrum: nearsighted, farsighted, an eye turn, lazy eye, convergence insufficiency, the whole bag of visual diagnoses. Another one that's pretty staggering is that 75 to 93% of all kids under Public Law 94-142 in the U.S., so diagnosed as learning disabled, ADD or ADHD, have a learning-related vision problem. And then a study out of Baltimore showed that 93 to 95% of juvenile delinquents had a vision problem that was interfering with their ability to learn. So, and I've done some exams in the inner city schools, and it's really heartbreaking to see the amount of visual dysfunction and just the poor access to services. In just even getting glasses is really tough. So vision problems can affect their ability to perform, but it can also affect self-esteem. Imagine that if you were asked to read something in front of your class and it sounded not so good, you wouldn't feel very good about, your confidence level would be pretty low. There's a high correlation between vision deficits and disabilities. That's a well-established fact. We'll talk a little bit about ADHD. It is a hot topic. I do have a perspective on ADHD that basically ADHD is a diagnosis, but I look at it more as a diagnosis of symptomology. So in other words, when you get diagnosed with ADD, to me, that's like being diagnosed with a fever. You go to the doctor, you come home, and you say, how did your visit go with the doctor? Great, what did he diagnose you with? Oh, he diagnosed me with a fever. You'd never hear that, right? A fever is a sign of something else. So the way I view ADHD is that it's a sign of something else. And the medicines do a great job. I think ADHD medicines have their place, and we have some kids that can't even function in therapy unless they're on their medicines. But the medicines really treat the symptoms, they don't treat the underlying cause. There are instances where the underlying cause is something visual, like Dr. Steele mentioned. Coordinating your eyes together to converge is a difficult task if you're not very skilled at it, and it can lead to inattention. So if I'm looking at this sheet of paper and I'm really working my eyes to keep that single and clear, it just, like she mentioned, it's exhausting, and after a while I'm going to hit the eject button, I'm going to give up, and I'm inattentive. Well, that inattention isn't because there's a miswiring in the visual attention area of the brain. It's because I have a vision problem that's causing me to be inattentive. And same thing with accommodative dysfunction. That's the clinical term for poor zooming of the eyes. So either one of those or combination of those can lead to attention deficits. The kids that we see and that Dr. Steele sees, once you work on these skills and you improve the ability to converge and diverge and focus the eyes, a lot of times you'll see the attention increases dramatically. It's a piece of the pie. There's a lot of other factors that go into attention, psychological. There's a whole ton of things that can be involved in attention. So, but a lot of times vision is a big piece of it. So that's how we view ADHD. In Ohio and in a lot of the states, we're not licensed to diagnose or treat ADHD. We just diagnose and treat the visual deficits that we encounter. Dyslexia, another hot topic. This one we could probably spend the whole evening talking about this, but basically it's defined, if you go to the website for the International Association, it's defined as an inability to read despite normal intelligence, inadequate instruction, and opportunity to learn. So essentially you have a deficit in rapid automatic naming, like how quickly can you name a visual stimulus, a symbol or a letter or a number. And it's also a deficit in phonological analysis, obviously a language-based deficit. And then it's also poor spelling. So dyslexics, they exist, they're out there, but I'll tell you, from my personal perspective, in my opinion, I think there's far fewer dyslexics than are truly diagnosed. A lot of dyslexics have vision skill deficits, and I'm going to give you a couple examples here that'll show you how this can be dyslexia, but really a vision issue. Dr. Steele mentioned saccades, so you know how she mentioned when your eye reads, your eye actually makes a little jump. So this is called a pursuit eye movement, where your eye follows across an object, and a saccade is where you make that darting movement back and forth. So our eyes make that micro hop from word to word. So if the sentence says, the dog was running across the street, my eye looks at the, hops to the word dog, was. If my eye hops to that letter S, I'll say saw instead of was. So I've now read the dog saw, and that's a dyslexic symptom, but it's a vision problem. So that's how a vision problem can be misinterpreted as dyslexia in one instance. Spelling, we get a lot of kids, I'm sure in your practice too, a lot of kids that have trouble with spelling. They put down on their history form spelling is a concern. Well, spelling really is a visual skill. If you're to spell properly, you have to see the word. So you guys have watched the spelling bee where they're on ESPN and they're on the microphone. They're looking up, not because there's a cue card up there, because they're picturing in their mind that word. There's 2,000 ways to write 44 English sounds. I mean, I think there's 8 or 9 different ways to pronounce the letter O in the English language. So English language, you cannot spell phonetically past like 2nd or 3rd grade, or else all the rules get all crazy. So spelling is very much a visual skill where the word is presented to you and you have to picture that word in your mind. If you've got good visualization, visual imagery, you can spell that letter forwards and backwards quickly. One of our activities in vision therapy is spelling backwards. So we'll say, do your normal spelling list, go over your words. Now do it where you got to spell it backwards. Why? Because you can't spell phonetically backwards. So just as a test, go home and ask your kid to spell their first name backwards. See how they do with it. And a lot of times you'll see them, if their first name is Mary, they'll go Y, R. They're going to go forward to go backward. They can't just go backwards nicely. So spelling is definitely a visual skill, and with proper intervention and work, you can definitely make it an easy thing to be a good speller. So we're going to have a little fun with spelling, since I thought it'd be fun. Who can pronounce this word? And if you know this trick, don't yell it out loud. Does anybody know it off the? Okay. So what do you guys think? How do you pronounce this? Give me a couple. So I heard Godi. Gochi, close. Getting there. Any other guesses? Okay, how about fish? So the F sound of GH from tough, the short I sound of O in women, and the sh sound of TI in station. So technically, in the English language, this can be pronounced as fish. So that was easy, right? How about this one? Well, now I taught you guys kind of the trick, so I'm going to expect you guys to figure this one out. Any guesses? Didn't think you'd have to show up and think, right? All right, how about a little help? All right, I'll help you out. Potato. So the P sounds like the GH in hiccup, and I know I've been told, oh, there's different ways to spell hiccup. O sounds like O-U-G-H in dough. T sounds like Tissic and the disease with TB. A like the E-I-G-H in neighbor. T sounds like the T-T-E in statuette. And the O from our French friends. So George Bernard Shaw, I think, has a book on those. So just kind of a little fun game to demonstrate that really spelling, you can't do it phonetically. There are languages, I believe the Russian language, Serbian language, you can spell phonetically. The way that you say it is the way you actually spell it. But in English, not so much. So a couple take-home messages. As Dr. Steele and I have mentioned, vision really does go beyond 20/20 eyesight. I think the key question, when you leave here, you have to ask, is vision helping or is it interfering with the student's education? Because vision is definitely not a passive sensory system. It needs to be helping, and there are a lot of cases where it's actually interfering. 80% of learning in a classroom setting is through the visual system. So it's a big bandwidth of data. The brain has to process that. Child has to make good sense of that material to retain it, and then later on have it on demand when they're tested. Add any other take-home messages?
I guess the take-home too is just to make sure that your kids have been examined properly, that not just a screening or not just I don't want to mention any names, but just to go to any chain optical and, they flip the dials and everything's perfect. I don't know how many times I've had these parents, and you wouldn't know unless we told you, and that's why we're telling you, that, well, I just had their eyes examined at wherever, and it's like, well, that's good, but they didn't check all of these things that Dr. Andrich and I and a lot of other doctors, check too, to make sure that the whole entire system is working.
So here's a couple of pictures of vision therapy in action. The top picture is of a very young child learning how to move their eyes, and so it's very difficult for them. So we actually have their head wedged between mom's legs, so they can't move their head. They got to move their eyes. Little boy working on electronic touchscreen device, doing some eye tracking. Look at the center, but use your peripheral vision for the sides. This gentleman is a physician, head of an organization in the area, who had an eye that was turning and wanted to get it straightened up for his upcoming wedding. So he was a lot of fun to work with and did really well in learning that skill. So it doesn't have to be just for little kids. Adults can have fun too. Here's some resources for you. I believe Sarah said these slides will be available online as a PDF. So these will be available to you through a link that you'll probably get an email. But these are a couple resources that have more information about vision and learning. There's a zip code locator in there, so if you're not necessarily from close to here, you can punch in your zip code and find doctors that do this. There aren't a ton of us in the area, but definitely, like Dr. Steele mentioned, it is an important thing to look at vision from a performance perspective, not just an optical perspective. So with that, we're going to open it up for some questions and answers. And I think before we do that, we're going to hit the little